everyone. Welcome back to the Tech Show, where my co-host Levi and I talk about all things edge tech, crypto, AI, AR, VR, and even occasionally we'll do some fun little news recap episodes or business episodes. Well, today is one of our business-related episodes, and we are going to be interviewing Levi and asking him some opinions on the concept of equity time, which I think, Levi, I don't think that's a term that's been coined. That's like been coined by us, right? Equity time, or is it?
Yeah, I think so. I'm sure somebody has said it somewhere at some point, but I haven't heard it. Uh,
So,
you
so
know,
since it's not an officially defined term, why don't we start with the definition of what is equity time, and we'll kind of delve into that a little bit during this podcast.
yeah. So a while back we chatted about my origin story, and we've also covered your origin story a little bit before that. And a big part of what led both of us to start our own businesses was the idea of trading value for money rather than our time for money.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so you and I have sort of coined this concept of equity time to sort of encapsulate the effort that we put towards things that don't have an immediate payoff,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
whether you're coming up with a company or you're, I would say probably doesn't include learning skills, but maybe, taking some courses on stuff like, if I have a project I want to work on and I need to learn some stuff for it, like that's kind of equity time that I would put in towards a thing that is building value that I might at some point be able to uh, sell, right?
Yeah.
And so it's the investment of time into equity is probably the
Yeah.
most concise way to put it.
Yeah, and it makes sense because if you think about it, everyone at some point is an investor, right? Or at least should be an investor. Whenever we think of investor, the most common scenario is like some rich guy who wants to put his money into a company and get shares of that company or get equity in that company, right? Not just because they're feeling particularly generous or charitable, but because they want a return on that investment, right? They want that money to grow and for them to get that money back, so that they have even more money than what they put into it. So in the same way, equity time is, if you don't have money to invest, you have at least hopefully time to invest, right?
Right.
Uh, and that will allow you to basically invest your time, your skills, your energy, your focus, your attention, with the in exchange for equity, which you're doing again not because you're particularly charitable, but because you're expecting that, hey, hopefully one day I'll get a return on this. So yeah, I think it's good. Anyone can be an investor whether or not you have money, right? It's just
Right.
how much
Right.
do you want to invest, and it's risky and painful both ways, but it's just a same equity, different type of investment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think something you and I come across quite a bit in the industry, and anybody else who's watching this that has done agency work is, I'm sure, intimately familiar with this particular request. But it's typically along the lines of, "Hey, we're out of money, or we don't have the budget, or one of those types of things." And then and it's, "What if we gave you equity?
Hmm.
5% of the company. Would you do this work for
All the
free?"
time, all the
All the
time.
time, right? Usually it's in the 2.5 to 5% range. Sometimes a little more if they're particularly desperate. I've had as little as 1% offered. And percentages don't mean much because it's how big is the slice of the pie, right? But it's still the idea is, instead of accepting money, will you accept equity for your time, right? And so I think that sort of getting this verbiage right has been pretty pivotal in our ability to make sure that clients understand that, like, it's not necessarily that we don't believe in their product or that we don't think that it has legs or that we don't, typically it's like, I'm already doing all of this other stuff for free for my own
Yeah,
stuff, like that,
yeah,
building equity in my company that I have on the side or this side hustle or what have you. And I just don't have the capacity to do more things, quote unquote, for free, right? That don't
Yeah.
have that immediate payoff. And
Yeah.
so I think that equity time in a lot of ways is sort of a bridge term that like builds commonality and sort of helps communicate like uh me with my investor hat on doesn't have the time capital, right?
Yeah.
So we use it quite a bit when we're communicating with clients, especially because that's when it really matters the most. We might say
Yeah.
it to our wives or something every once in a while, but like really, it's a way to communicate, um, you know, the time available to work on things that don't pay right away.
Yeah. Yeah. So how should people think about their equity time, and how do they make decisions on when to invest equity time, when to not, and for what kind of things they should invest in, and how have you leverage your equity time throughout your journey? Again, I'll link to your story and my story in the description below, so if you haven't already seen that, be sure to check that out. But yeah, there's a lot of stories in there of how we've invested equity time to get to where we are, right? So how should people think about equity time and make a decision on that?
It's a good question. I think that, everybody's situation is different, you know. If you don't have working capital, if you don't have runway, if you don't have uh the money to put food on your table and keep your lights on, it's really hard to give or to invest equity time, right? If you so that has some downward pressure on how much equity time you would invest, but then you also have scenarios where maybe you don't have these things and you've put in the applications that you are interested in putting in, you've updated your LinkedIn and you've got nothing left to do. That's a great time to start investing your equity time into something that potentially has you know an ROI down the road. So I would say that it's not a clear cut rule, but it's more of just like a very complex set of factors maybe that would lead you to invest more or less or any time into equity time. I think if you were to exit a company and you had millions of dollars in the bank, probably spending all your time on equity time. you know so I think that the key is making sure that, like, for me, one of the things that I do is I make sure that when I'm investing equity time, it's something that also uh keeps me sharp and would prepare me for a new, like, would expand my offerings in agency, right? Like in what I'm doing for clients. And so I will often, dive into learning from an equity time perspective and build out stuff that help me better serve my clients, and then also have this potential to sell or to make
Yeah.
a bunch of money
Yeah.
off down the road. And I've
Yeah.
done a few of those projects, and only one of them has, like, have I gotten all the way to an exit on.
Which is great, right? I
Yeah,
think very,
yeah.
very few people make it to an exit. So do you want to share a little bit of that story?
Yeah, so basically, picking up where I left off on the origin story, right? So we got into agency work, and you and I started helping out a lot of, like, relatively big name clients and making decent income. And Julie was doing well with her real estate. My wife Julie was doing, making enough to pay the bills. And so combining our resources together, I realized I could definitely invest in more equity time projects. Back to that original plan of, like, her being the working income and then me doing equity time for the big swings. I was like, okay, I could do that now. And so I had our buddy Charles, who was on our podcast. Our he approached me with a business idea. It was a seed to sale solution in Oklahoma. I guess growers in Oklahoma were required to have a digital seed to sale solution, and He wanted to build it in Flutter, and I Dart programming language, which is a Google thing. And at the time, I was not familiar with Flutter. I had no idea what he was talking about. I'm like, "What's that?" Right? And I was like, "Okay, that makes sense. Let's do this." And so I spent an entire month, you know, learning Flutter, and like as I was learning, building out this product with him.
So um, for our viewers, right? What would you say is your secret ingredient, or what's special about Levi that somebody would want to hire you to even learn a programming language that you don't even know, right? So like your skills obviously it wasn't Flutter, it was something else. So what is that magic skill that like people are looking for?
You know, that's a great question. I think part of it, uh, I don't view myself as magical or special. Let's first say that.
I do.
Okay. I would say, well, okay, let me ask you, because there was a point in our career where you said, Levi, I need more Levi's. Can you please figure out how to replicate yourself? And
Yeah.
so I did, and we scaled up. But like, what was the thing that you wanted me to replicate?
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. I think that's fair to reverse the question on me. So I would say yeah, so I would say, you have very high integrity. So that's a key one. Like you don't cheat, you don't cut corners. You do things very thoroughly. I know that like if I open up the wall, there's not going to be like a bunch of mold and spiders behind it, right? It looks good on the outside, but it's also good on the inside. And yeah, I think that is, believe it or not, very hard to come by. That, and also just your design is really good, right? So when you make something, it's not ugly, it's usually really beautiful. So it doesn't really matter what programming language you use. I think there's that element of trust, which is huge, right? And I think to do that is actually hard, right? It's easy, I think, for a lot of people to be like, well, let's just make it look good, like the facade, but let's take the easy way or the shortcut. But I think at the end of the day, to do things right, to do things with quality, and to do things that with care behind it and attention to detail, I think that's what wins at the end, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, I think your story is a perfect example where it didn't even matter that you didn't know the skill of how to use that programming language. People wanted the thing behind it, not the actual skill itself, but the right that integrity to and that attention to detail and the quality.
Yeah. Couldn't said it better myself. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So yeah, no, I think it's good for people listening and even myself included to like be reminded of that, right? It's like
Yeah.
what's truly important. What are people actually looking for? It's not the skill on your resume, because how can you? That's not something you can really write on your resume, right?
Right.
That's almost something like that's where the experience comes in, like knowing people. Like somebody has to know you in order to be like, yeah, I want Levi because of these things. You could like write all that stuff down on the resume, but it wouldn't mean much until somebody actually had that firsthand experience, right? And a lot of
Right.
people get so caught up in like, well, what's the skill? What skill should I learn? And skills are great, like don't get me wrong, but I've known a lot of people in a lot of agencies with a lot of skills and a lot of different tools that don't have those things, and it's yeah, it doesn't end well.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a big effort that I put out towards truly understanding what somebody's looking for. Like I try really hard to, it's not like what do you want it to do? It's what do you want someone to feel while they're doing what you want it to do? Right? Like how do you want them uh to feel like about you, about your product? There's a big difference. And so it's not just what you do, but like how you do it, that I think is really important,
Yeah.
and so like you can, yeah, I don't know, there's a lot to say there, but at the end of the day I would say, the that scenario was he needed a designer. He needed somebody who had attention to detail. I found myself in a position of like you, Charles, like a lot of the guys that I find myself working with more and more and more um, are innovators and will figure out very hard, complex, never before connected connections, pioneering in a space. But it's like to do that and to go and just like be super attentive, and making sure that all the details and all the functionality and all that, like, it's like nobody has that kind of capacity or time. And so
Yeah,
I'm I would consider myself maybe a refactor guru, at this point. Like, that's, the design, the UI UX, but also refactoring code bases to like
yeah,
cleanly and efficiently, perform with like to what a user would expect, right? And so it's like user experience is way more than just the UI. It goes deeper. It goes all the way into the code and how it works, and basic stuff like, are you going to await every one of these promises, or are you going to say these three can batch here, these six can batch here, and these two can batch here, and all of a sudden you have three instead of 10, and it's 20 times faster. Like, those types of decisions are really important. And so I bring that type of an attention to detail to and depth of control to the user experience,
yeah,
way beyond the UI. So I
yeah.
think that was part of it. And I've also, I think, I learn fast. Like, I'm a learner. I study, learn, and implement quickly. And I think that
Which is
probably
key.
also helped.
Which is
Yeah.
key. I have had somebody on my team who they refuse to learn. They're like, "Well, this is what I do. This is my vertical, and I'm not gonna like go outside of this." And it's pretty frustrating.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
being a learner and being flexible is yeah, key. So going back to equity time. So what, like you said, a lot of people approach you and be like, "Hey, would you do this for equity?" What was different about Charles's project? Like, what was you know what made you decide like, okay, it is a risk, but it's one I'm willing to learn and do and go out of my way.
So, will you do this for equity? Instantly says, can you please take off your developer hat and put on your investor hat?
Mm-hmm.
Instantly
Yeah.
for me, every time.
Yeah.
I don't care how hard the project is. I don't care how complex it is. I don't care how doable it is. I don't care. Like, what I care about is if my time equals money,
Mm-hmm.
how much money am I investing and what's the
Yeah.
ROI? Right. And
Yeah.
so that's why we coined equity time. Why that's the phrasing we use is because
Yeah.
it has to, we want that equity to mature and to grow. And so I think that in this particular scenario, Charles had done some really, really good market research. He had polls. He was interviewing people. He was asking, like, the questions he had asked were related to price point and related to likelihood of purchase. And like, so he had a very defined market down to like the number of, like, an actual number of people who were going to be required to do this. And so it was like, there's this broader, like, in all of these different states you could do these things, but he had a very specific market, a very targeted number of people. He had a very specific price point. Like, you could do the math and say, if this exceeds or over performs by X amount, it could be this. If it is less, it's still worth my time. And so I would say that I actually didn't know him as well as I do now. We're very good friends now, but like, when he proposed this to me, I'd only worked with him on a couple projects. Like, we did an Air Force project together, and we did the Halliburton project together, but like, we didn't work in this capacity, like partnership wise,
Yeah.
prior to this. And so I knew that we worked well together on the development side of things, and the customers existed. Right? There's a difference between this is a good idea and this is an idea that somebody is desperate to give me their money for.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
Um, and so I now that answer has to absolutely 100% of the time be yes. Is there someone who's desperate to give you their money for this product? If not,
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
interested, right?
Yeah.
If it's finding a market and growing an idea and getting a concept and, making people like it, or, a lot of educating of what, no, that's just not equity time material for me, because there's only so much time. Like, I would invest in some of those big things with capital potentially, right? For me, time is more valuable than capital. And
Yeah.
so, um, and the other
Yep.
thing is the opportunity cost.
Yeah. I was gonna actually ask you about that next. I'm glad you brought it up.
Go for it. What do you want to know?
So there's two things that come to mind, right? So like I feel like equity time is not a full story unless you also include opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is well defined. It is in the dictionary. So for anyone viewing who doesn't know what opportunity cost is, it's basically the money you would have made uh, if you had spent your time on this other thing, right? Uh, and it's used in many different contexts, but in the context of equity time, it's like, well, if you had worked a job, right, or if you had worked another contract that was paying you, how much money would you have made that you're giving up, right? And
Right.
I feel like that's so important for two reasons. One is it values your equity time that you're putting in, but another thing is that it could also hamper you from investing, right? If your opportunity cost becomes a little bit higher, you might not have the incentive or being willing to take on the risk to uh, invest equity time into an idea, right? So yeah, go
Right.
go ahead with what you were going to say on opportunity cost.
Yeah. So, I would say, like, Julie and I approach our household as sort of like a business, right? Like, one of our jobs at times can be even be a loss leader. We have the working capital, and the big swing, and so, when she was doing her real estate stuff, a couple years, like 3 years ago, four maybe now. I think it was 2018. You and I were starting to get a lot of projects, and Julie's business was booming, and she got offered a listing agent job that paid 175 grand a year. And that was more than we'd
Wow.
ever made in a year,
Wow.
right? At that point, combined, that was more than we'd ever made. And um she like we talked about it and we did the math, and we're like, if we do this, then we don't have this freedom, we don't have this flexibility, and then I wouldn't be able to do the big swings, and like, so we did all the math, and even though it was like, a decent pay bump and a lot more guaranteed, so to speak, the opportunity cost of what we intended to do and fully expected to succeed in was way too high. And
Yeah.
so we turned down more money per year than is probably healthy to turn down. Because of that opportunity cost. And within, I think, 3 years, we did more than double that, and so, like, it paid off. Like, so I feel like after having some track record of making those kinds of sacrifices, in the favor or in the name of opportunity cost, that's really informed a lot of the decisions that we make going forward. So, like, last year, I think it was, no, 2020, at the end of 2020, I was offered 1% of a $40 million company. And
Ooh, that's a lot of money.
right. But I had to give, it was like going to be like 20 grand of my own money.
Hmm.
And it was going to be, it was
Basically in
like,
taxes, right?
yeah, 3 or 4 months of, no, that one was to pay devs, like, for app folks
Oh, okay.
paying developers.
Okay.
And then it was going to be like, 3 months or 4 months of like full-time work, meaning I wasn't able to work on any other projects at the time.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was going to mean, when they paid me, because they were already valued at 40 grand, the way that options work, the way that all of these things work, they couldn't give me more than like 100,000 a year in employee options if I became an employee. And if I didn't become an employee, then the NPOs, I think they're called, the non-standard NSOs, maybe, options, those are fully taxed as though their income. So I get paid 400 grand in options, and if I wanted to execute them, I'd have to go pay, 100 grand in or more in taxes that I don't have the liquidity for. And so, like, I did all the math and was like, that was like a hard part of it. But then I did the math on the real estate stuff that Julie and I do, right? We've got a few investment properties, and our secret sauce, or our sauce, it's not really a big secret, is to like essentially buy houses that are 2 1s that we can make into 3 2s and clean them up and make them
Two
look good.
bedroom,
And
one bathroom. Is that
yep,
right? Yep.
yep, into 3 bed, 2 bath, typically with an unfinished basement or something. And it's basically just this like 100 grand, 100 grand. Like it's just like this machine that we just print. And so it was like, the capital needed to do that next project would have
Yeah.
been the capital I would have needed to put into this
Yeah.
startup. And the I should also note that the end goal of that 400 grand 1% was to raise it, I think, 100. So it would have like more than tripled had we hit our goal. I would have been, it would have been over $1 million potentially.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
but if you look at the opportunity cost of like keeping the capital flowing and the 4 ways that real estate makes money and all the beautiful things about real estate income, and it's relatively passive, but you still have to do some work, so it's not necessarily that, but it's just the money that needed to go towards that would have been diverted, and that opportunity cost was too high. And so, you know, after doing all of that math, it was like 5 times more profitable to just keep doing the real estate investments and stick with agency work, instead of
Yeah.
doing an equity play at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so that's an example of where two examples of where opportunity cost. One of them is panned out. The other one is hit or miss. We still haven't quite gotten resolution on it. The house that we ended up buying ended up burning down. so,
Literally,
so
right?
yeah. So all of my projections went like this. But
Oh
I
man.
think we've only technically lost like 45 grand in that time, and then we've also lost time, which has a cost.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was kind of an unforeseen, unknowable type thing, but I still think in the end it'll pencil out to be the right decision. um yeah,
Mm.
so that's how
That's
opportunity cost plays into my equity time decisions at
yeah.
this point.
I remember I was talking with a group of mixed reality agency owners, and a lot of us, and then everyone we knew, we made an observation. We're like, why are none of us like computer science majors, or like why do none of us have degrees in programming? And yet we've basically like we've all started software companies. And the conclusion we came to, of course, it wasn't a very scientific, robustly surveyed conclusion, but the conclusion basically that we came to was based on us talking to some of our other friends, was it comes down to opportunity costs. If you uh, got a degree in computer science, it's super easy to get a job at a tech company, and you'd be making, at the time it was like between 130 and 200 grand a year. I think now it's like 250 to like 500 grand a year, something crazy like that with inflation. But basically, like it would have been very hard, and maybe the numbers wouldn't have even panned out for somebody to try and make that decision, right? To start an agency, right? Whereas if you could just go and get a job somewhere, so yeah, I would say, you know, with equity time and opportunity costs, like always be investing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you can't invest time because you don't have any time, but you got a lot of capital, right? And then you'd become an investor. Or sometimes you'd have a lot of time and not a lot of capital, and you can invest more equity time. But I think just in general, like always keeping an investor mindset, right, is
Right.
what's important. Because if you don't invest either your time or your money, then that means you're just earning and then spending but not doing anything for the future, right? Not
Right.
uh, putting money into something that can grow, some sort of equity that can grow. And I,
Yep.
I think there's always risks involved, but I think you're the master, Levi, at minimizing risk, right?
I put a lot of effort towards it. I don't know if I've mastered it, but it's a very big focus of mine. Yeah, I
Yeah.
really, really don't like high risk. I like high upside, but the high downside makes me very uncomfortable. So I don't. I'm typically very quick to cut something or to say no to something. My
So
default answer is no, and I feel great about that. Like I have to. It has to be, or else you could just get pulled in every direction and not get any traction. So you have to be
yeah,
able to focus and like really push, um
yeah,
and
and
that's
I
hard to
and I
do
think
when you're
I think that
distracted.
falls in line with some of the great investors of the world, right? Like Warren Buffett, right? I think his strategy is like focus, like extreme focus, and saying no to distractions, and like keeping a very narrow portfolio. I was watching this meme. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but it was like this traffic and this guy like keep trying to jump lanes, and he kept like getting further and further behind. But then this old guy on like the walker, like he was like going so far
Yeah.
ahead, and that was like Warren Buffett.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's
So
funny.
yeah, I
Yeah,
think we're. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that the biggest thing I would say regarding equity time is that it needs to be faceted, I don't know if multimodal is the right word, but like basically it has to have a compound effect on your uh outcomes. So like right now I'm working on a project, an AI project, currently in stealth, but we'll be talking about it on
I
this channel
cannot
here
wait for us
sooner.
to talk about that on this
It's
podcast.
gonna
I
be good.
cannot wait.
But it's full MERN stack, right? It's MongoDB, Express, React, and Node.js. It's got a bunch of like AI API implementations broken out into services. Like it's a really complex solution that will be very easy for the end user to use, right? Like we deal with the complexity so that the UX is good for the end user, but that is very, very, very stretching. It's a huge undertaking to do, a full stack app solo with that kind of back end complexity. And um, so while on one hand it's a really, really, really big swing that I think is going to be amazing and I'm very excited about, it's also really sharpening and honing in a lot of the skills that I have to stay sharp on for various projects. And so like right now I don't have that uh you know uh full stack agency project going, and so this is really good for me to be doing while and staying sharp while that type of a project isn't on my plate right now, you know. And so that was one of the reasons why I went down that path. We were talking with a guy and he had a great app idea and we put our bid in and it was a couple hundred grand and he only had 50. And at the time, like I wasn't personally sharp on some of the tools that would have potentially been necessary. If I had been, maybe I would have done sort of like a 50 grand plus equity for 3 months of effort. Like I probably had that capacity at that time, and I had to say no because of that. So part of how I shaped and crafted this project that I'm doing, this equity time project, is uh, when I'm done with the project, I'd be in a position to actually say yes to something like that. The next time that opportunity pops up, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And so because it's one thing to be like loosely familiar with some of the pieces and like have your team working on those things. It's a completely different thing to do it with equity time,
Yeah.
and so
Yep.
your personal skill set is very, very. uh, uh, not, it's contingent on your personal skill set.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah. That makes
you have
sense.
to, and so because it's your time, right? I know that's one of the things that you've had, where you're stretched so thin and you've got all of your developers and their employees. I sub out my guys, you have W-2. And like for you, you kind of have to have the money to do projects because of how stretched you have so many equity time things going that like if this idea came up, we talked about maybe doing it together but you would have needed to have money to pay people because of the amount of equity time, that capacity is you're at capacity, on that particular project right now. We've talked about what that'll look like maybe when you have some capacity open up, but um because we also have LaborBot, which we're both, 50 on and have that piece going too. So we have another project we're working on, but this
Which
particular one,
we should do an episode on that because Tesla's been coming out with some crazy stuff, you know.
yes. Yeah, there's like three companies now that are like
Yeah.
getting really close to making what we need to do
I
our
know,
thing.
right? I was thinking
So
about that. I'm like, wow, this is like what we were looking for like 10 years ago.
2016. So
Yeah.
what is that, 7, 8? Yeah, man.
6 years. Yeah.
6 years. Yeah. Anyway, that's my final thoughts, I would say, on equity time.
Yeah, that's great, and that's perfect because we're looks like we're just out of time. So yeah, thank you, Levi. That was great. Good talk on equity time and opportunity costs and how to think about always being an investor, right? Whether you have time or money. I think these are some great tips, some great insights. So definitely appreciate it. And thank you everyone for watching. Again, if you have any questions for Levi, please be sure to ask it down in the comments below. He loves to hear from you. I love to hear from you. Again, in the video description, there's a little bit of background on Levi's story, my story. I'll link to both of those episodes. And be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys next week. Thank you so much.